I'm very pleased to welcome a special guest, and I'd like you to join me in welcoming San Francisco Bay Area architect Richard Gage, AIA, a member of the American Institute of Architects and founder and former CEO of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. He now leads the charge for a new World Trade Center investigation along with his courageous wife Gail at RichardGage9111.org. Richard, thank you for being on the program. Great to see you.
Great to see you too, Robert. Great to be here with you.
Now I'll turn to Richard, who is going to share his treasure trove of information. He's been working on it as long as we have, and he has dedicated his life to this endeavor, just as I have dedicated my life to resolving the mysteries of the John F. Kennedy assassination and the others, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy. They are all connected. They are all part of one long-standing program. And perhaps in the second hour, we may get a chance to flesh that out. So Richard Gage, thank you. I'm ready to hear your presentation and to share it with the audience.
To know these facts, not the courage that you have already exhibited 100-fold, but of our listening audience who may or may not be aware of many of these facts, which I started, as you mentioned, 18 years ago now. I was just shocked to learn that there was a third tower that came down on 9/11. I had no idea whatsoever. This was something that the American Institute of Architects, of which I'm one of 90,000 members, has not received one bulletin on this, the third worst structural failure in modern history. The worst if you don't consider the ones that were hit by a plane. So this building was easily the tallest building in most of our states. It was dwarfed next to the Twin Towers, which were the tallest buildings in the world at the time. But it's about a football field in length away from the North Tower. And it stood just fine in the morning as the towers came down. There was some minor damage that hit Building 7. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who was tasked by Congress to explain these collapses to the American people, said, though, that this damage was not a significant factor in the building's collapse. Certainly not a part of the initiation of collapse, which happened on the other side of the building. So what happened to this building? Well, about 7 hours after the towers came down, it does this. We see the east penthouse comes down first, and 6 seconds later, the entire building drops like a rock straight down, uniformly, symmetrically, into its own footprint, 47 stories. As we'll talk about, this happens at free fall. NIST says, well, we looked at this, and it took them 7 years to come out with their final report on this building. Here's what they concluded.
What we found was that uncontrolled building fires caused an extraordinary event. The collapse of World Trade Center 7 was primarily due to fire.
Fires. Okay, well, we should probably look at those fires. These are the worst fires that we have photographic or video evidence of in the building. And they are few, they are small, and they are scattered throughout the building. And furthermore, they are burning out in the northeast corner of the building on the 12th floor, where NIST developed its collapse initiation theory. They're burned out over an hour before the building came down. Their theory says these fires caused expansion of 50-foot long beams, pushing a girder off of its seat, causing floor 13 to come on 12 and 12 and 11 and so on for 8-9 floors, which left column 79 in the northeast, near the northeast corner, unbraced. So then they have this whole collapsing theory, none of which makes any sense. And we can go into that in detail. We do on our webinars at RichardGage9111.org. But you can see these fires are indeed burned out over an hour and a half before this building comes down on the floor of interest. NIST requires those fires to be burning on that floor at that time because their whole theory is a thermal expansion of long span steel beams.
I would like to say, Richard, if I may, unlike the fires in the World Trade Center, which the heat is ascribed to the burning of jet fuel, there was no jet fuel in these buildings, and the tinder for these fires could never reach the temperatures that are necessary to expand steel beams.
And we'll prove that point too. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
But I forgot to say, you're right, Robert. There's no plane that hit this building.
Right.
There weren't 3 planes in New York. There were just 2. And so NIST has to develop this whole fire theory with their simulation on the top here that shows fires burning outrageously the last couple of hours of this building's life. And yet the photographs prove that they were burned out. In fact,
That's right.
we actually have fires burning much hotter, larger, and longer lasting fires in these buildings that have never brought any of these steel frame fire protected structures down. It just doesn't happen. They're designed to be an incinerator, meaning it'll burn whatever's inside of it, but it won't burn itself. They're type 1 fire protected buildings. Not one of these since 9/11 has come down, even though they're fully engulfed in fire. So what could we have? Building 7 on the right, a series of known controlled demolitions on the left. Is there any similarity? Is there enough similarity to warrant an investigation into the possible use of explosives, especially since it looks exactly like a controlled demolition? In fact, this should have been the first hypothesis that NIST developed, because especially since it looks exactly like a controlled demolition, especially since fire, the official cause of this building's collapse, has never in history brought down a steel frame fire protected building. But no, it was relegated, this theory that they just wanted to sweep under the rug, to a series of very frequently asked questions that they posted later on their website. So we have to look at see if the building has the features of controlled demolition. Well, we've identified 10 of them from the late David Ray Griffin. The first is a sudden onset. Is there a sudden onset? Let's listen to Dan Rather as he takes his look at Building 7 and makes his own assessment.
What you're seeing are high shots. Here, we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Describe that.
What was that? Well, Dan's using his intuition here, right? We all should be using our gut instinct. We've seen these before, like the old hotels in Las Vegas. We have a frame of reference for a controlled demolition, so we know one when we see one. In fact, the feature 2 of those are a straight down symmetrical collapse. Let's look from West Street. Here it goes straight down symmetrically into its own footprint, as a matter of fact. How do you do that? You have to remove all of the core columns first within a fraction of a second of each other, and then about a second later, the perimeter columns. And then you repeat that on each floor. Any deviation in that pattern, and the building will begin to tip over. So this is quite precise. Do these fires have the level of precision to take out all of those core columns within a fraction of a second of each other? No. If that doesn't happen, you get problems like this that happen once in a while in controlled demolitions when the explosives don't go off perfectly. Somebody has to go into that building and fix that. And we'll see that's exactly what they did in Building 7, as a matter of fact. If buildings are damaged on one side, like column 79, for instance, in the Northeast, they tend to fall over. This is intuitive to the weakest, on the weakest side. They don't go straight down through the path of greatest resistance, which is exactly what Building 7 did as we track its speed of descent. David Chandler, physics teacher, documents that it comes down at free fall. What does that mean? That's as fast as a bowling ball falling out of the sky. How does a building do that? NIST said this can't happen. That would mean it would have no structure underneath it. They were denying this for 8 years, but finally, after being publicly confronted in their own press conference in 8, they relented and admitted that, yeah, you're right, it did come down at free fall for at least a third of its 7-second fall. Well, what does that mean? Where did all that structure go? 40,000 tons of structural steel had to have been removed instantly on each of successive floors during that period of free fall, 8 floors, for all of those columns on each floor, starting with the interior and then the exterior. Well, do these fires, again, have that level of capability to remove those columns, allowing free fall? No. And free fall acceleration, by the way, is accelerating, meaning it's getting faster and faster and faster every second at 9.8 meters per second squared. That means not one column of these columns gave any resistance for any of that 3-second period of time. It's very clear what's going on here. And so we look, well, what else? What other clues do we have? Feature number 5, is there a dismemberment of the steel columns? Well, we had a 47-story skyscraper with 40,000 tons of moment-resisting and X-braced frame fall like a house of cards all of a sudden into a pile about 4 to 6 stories tall. This is the kind of building where the columns and beams are rigidly welded. In buildings that fall due to natural causes, we have the building typically falling over. Like these in earthquakes, the columns and beams are not severed one from another. The concrete is not pulverized to a fine powder. And these fires don't have that capability either. So what could it be then? Do we have sounds of explosions heard by witnesses? Here's one, Daryl, a medical student being interviewed that afternoon.
We were watching the building actually because it was on fire.
That evening.
We were watching the building actually because it was on fire. The bottom floors of the building were on fire, and we heard this sound, the thunder. Turned around, we were shocked. It looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out. And it was horrifying. And then about a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that, and we saw the building crash down all the way to the ground.
Very helpful. Any other witnesses? Here's Kevin McPadden, former Air Force medic, discussing his experience.
You heard you wanted to grab onto something. There was no doubt in my mind.
And this gentleman, Bill Rosati, who saw flashes of light.
I was standing like 2 blocks away, and all of a sudden I just seen a big flash, and then I seen the building coming down, and I just seen people just running everywhere, chaotic like.
And this gentleman, first responder, Captain Richard Patterson of the FDNY.
1-7 let go as well, and was a series of concussive explosions.
And this gentleman, Patrick Dillon, first responder.
I remember feeling that, like it was like freight trains underneath the earth, shaking the earth, even shaking me. That's when we all saw Building 7 crumple in the middle, like way up at the top. It buckled and then dropped.
And this gentleman, Barry Jennings, who, along with Mayor Giuliani's attorney, Michael Hess, were trapped inside the building by explosions because they had gone back into the building after everybody else had evacuated. Nobody told them it was evacuated. They were going to the meeting, the emergency meeting that they were called to on the 23rd floor, which was the Emergency Operations Center. And this is their experience trying to come back down from the 23rd floor.
When we got to the 8th floor, I started walking to one side of the building. That side of the building was gone. The first explosion I heard when I was on the stairwell landing, when we made it down to the 6th floor. Then we made it back to the 8th floor. I heard some more explosions. You know,
What sort of sound?
like a boom, like an explosion.
And more than one?
Yes.
We started walking down the stairs. We made it to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor.
When we get outside, a police officer comes to me and says, you have to run. We have more information of bombs, so you have to run.
Information of bombs like this heard by these first responders the late morning of 9/11 in the vicinity of Building 7?
Yeah, here's one of the guys. He can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, hold on. You want to call your mother or something?
This says any of these things that sound like explosions are actually the building collapsing. Well, there's no building collapsing at this moment. And obviously the other, yeah, absolutely. That is well stated, Robert. Thank you. Because we also have, if this was a conspiracy, which it obviously is, no matter how you look at it, it's in this case a conspiracy to plant these explosives in the tower. People would know about it in advance, and lots of people do, including Chief Nick Visconti, who says we're moving the command post over this way. That building's coming down. So they're expecting the building to come down. Mind you, no steel frame fire protected structure has ever come down by fires, especially fires with these small, few, and scattered flames throughout the building. And here goes 7. It's fascinating. And also Chief Pete Hayden, who is discussing here later in an interview his knowledge that the building was going to come down.
Well, we had our special operations people set up surveying instruments to monitor and see if there was any movement of the building. We were concerned of the possibility of collapse of the building, and we had a discussion with one particular engineer there, and we asked him if we allowed it, could we anticipate a collapse, and if so, how soon? And it turned out that he was pretty much right on the money, that he said in its current state you have about 5 hours.
You have about 5 hours before the building comes down. Mind you, the building is on fire. There's never been a steel frame fire protected structure collapse due to fire. So how can this engineer, who remains anonymous, predict that it's going to come down in 5 hours when it's never happened in history? And so they knew that it was going to come down. Obviously, they will not release the name of this engineer. How about these mysterious construction workers walking away from Building 7, hearing an explosion over their shoulder, looking back at the building, and then looking straight into the CNN camera and saying this?
Keep your eye on that building. It'll be coming down. Building is about to blow up. Moving back here. All right, guys? Sorry.
We are walking back. The building.
Now the building's about to blow up. It's not just going to come down. Flame and debris coming down. So they're expecting it to blow up. How do they know that? It has a few small scattered fires. The firefighters were held back from going into the building because they were told it was going to come down, and they're just standing around wondering why they're not fighting these fires, which they have had command over. Well, maybe we get another clue from first responder Patrick Dillon, who went into the building to get some rest, and here's what happened there.
All right. And he pointed to what turned out to be the entrance to Building 7's lobby. He said, go in there, take a break, there's other guys in there, like that. And that's what I did. I finished coming down off the pile and climbed over the wreckage of Vesey, and went in those revolving doors and just kind of fell on the floor. There were other guys in there doing the same thing I was, just shaking their heads and spitting out poison and trying to get their lungs back together again, as I was. And I was on the floor. These battalion chiefs come in through the revolving doors. There was 3 of them. They had the white helmets. I didn't get any IDs off them. But as soon as they stepped inside, what stepped in behind them were these 2 people in black with black ski masks on and Uzis. And the Uzis were, hanging off their necks. And I don't know what they were or who they were, but the battalion chiefs started yelling at us, right, ordering us to get out of this building, get out of this building. They're going to pull the building. Everybody out now. And they ordered us back out.
The story gets very interesting now with these thugs with Uzis around their necks, corroborated by Captain Patterson from the FDNY.
So he and I made our way over to the entrance.
With Chief Fox, who they just lost a whole bunch of people in both towers, and they're trying to figure out what to do next. And they head toward Building 7.
So he and I made our way over to the entrance of the building. Before we arrived there was a construction worker who happened to be, he emerged from the dust cloud and walked past the chief and I, and he said he had overheard the chief's comment, and he paused and said, "That'll be coming down around 5 o'clock.
The chief's comment.
We part ways. We arrive at 7, and there were 2 paramilitarily clad men with black rifles, sunglasses. And as we approached the entrance, they closed ranks and said, one of them said, "This building has been secured," which is odd because in my experience in the FDNY, anybody preventing access to the fire department in the event of a fire, that's a criminal act. The chief and I were not in a position to argue the point, given the inequality in weaponry present.
So this story is a lot deeper than we've been told, a whole lot deeper. Now here's Kevin McPadden.
The choice of weapons, Richard, the choice of weapons is very odd. An Uzi is not a standard issue to American federal forces, police forces, and we all know where the Uzis are made.
Yes, and who may have been carrying them. He did not identify an accent per se, which
Right.
I was looking for myself.
But the mask is strange too, you know, the idea.
What?
The masks.
Oh yeah, why
sunglasses, black
cover
glasses,
yourself?
black, typical description of a man in black.
It's not typical of the U.S. National Guard or military who showed up at some point. I don't think they were there that day, though. And we have Kevin McPadden, who heard explosions earlier. Now, he and others were held back several blocks from Building 7 because they were expecting it to come down. And he's listening to a person he believed to be a Red Cross worker, and he's listening to the radio held in their hands. And this is what he experiences.
At the last few seconds, he took his hand off, and you heard 3.
And then he talked about those explosions. So do fires bring buildings down to countdowns? What's really going on here? This story is thickening quite a bit. Well, it gets even more interesting. The BBC announces the collapse of this building 20 minutes before it happened.
Now, more on and indeed it has. Apparently, that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were. And it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy.
Sketchy indeed. We've never lost a fire-protected structure, and she's announcing the collapse 20 minutes before it happens. Does this make them psychic? They apologize for this grievous error, citing the confusing events of the day. It's pretty incredible. But they've been outdone by CNN, who announced it that morning.
In New York, Alan Dobbs-Frank joins us on the phone in Lower Manhattan. Alan?
Aaron, just 2 or 3 minutes ago, there was yet another collapse or explosion. I'm now out of sight. A Good Samaritan has taken me in on Duane Street. But at 11:15, there was another collapse or explosion following the 10:30 collapse of the second tower. And a firefighter who rushed by us estimated that 50 stories went down. The street filled with smoke. It was like a forest fire roaring down a canyon.
No other 50-story building went down that morning. No building went down that morning. There were some buildings that were severely damaged, but he's very specific in his language. He's talking about something like Building 7, right? And it maybe was supposed to go down that early, because if it had gone down at that time, 10:45, it would have been completely obscured by the massive dust clouds released when the towers went down. We wouldn't even have any video of it. So fascinating. Maybe it was a dud, and those construction workers who said a building's going to blow up, walking away from the building after hearing that explosion, maybe they had gone in there to fix a dud of a controlled demolition. That's possible. What else can we learn, though, from the building's developer, Larry Silverstein, who was interviewed a year later about Building 7? And here's what he says.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
Whoa. Pull it, as you mentioned, Robert, is a term used in the controlled demolition industry to bring a building down. He says, oh, I didn't mean pull it. I meant pull the firefighters out of the building. The firefighters were never in the building. They weren't allowed to fight the fire. Well, he had developed Building 7 in the late 80s, and then he put a bid on to purchase, and a 99-year lease, the rest of the 6 buildings of the World Trade Center. And that all happened just 6 weeks prior to 9/11. It transferred from Port Authority public hands into his private hands, along with his co-investors. And yeah, he did quite well. But there were no firefighting operations in Building 7 at all. Clearly, FEMA and NIST both clarify this. This is quite extraordinary. One of the reasons they say there were no firefighting operations is because they said there's no water to the buildings. And NIST says, well, gosh, if we had water, the building would have extinguished the fires itself. Well, guess what? The water comes from the north, past Building 7, down to the south to the rest of the World Trade Center. And Chief Hayden himself said, yes, there was water for fire extinguishing. And it's documented also. There it is. And we have adequate water supplies to the building, as can be seen by the fat hose on the right, feeding the fire engine. And so from the water supply, from the fire hydrant. So these are the mechanisms that firefighters use, Siamese connections, to feed the building. But they were told not to. And we can prove that there was water supply in the building because through the broken windows, we see the showers of sprinklers coming down. So the sprinklers appear to have controlled those fires. This part comes from Paul Cayley's excellent documentary, Calling Out Bravo 7, which you can see on our website, RichardGage9111.org. And there's many other compelling facts and videos in there also, including what the experts say. Experts like Danny Jawenko, a 27-year controlled demolition expert in Europe.
Danny Jawenko is the expert on this in Europe. What did he say?
Dit is controlled demolition. Zeker weten. Zeker weten. Er is nagesprongen. Dit is een opdrachtteam gedaan van experts.
Without a simultaneous and patterned loss of several of its columns at key locations within the building. Well, there's 2 to 3 dozen structural engineers saying very similar things. One of them is from the University of Alaska, one of the top forensic structural engineers in the country, Professor Leroy Halsey, with his team of PhD candidates, went to perform a finite element analysis on Building 7, modeling it for fire and the damage to it that could happen from the same fires using the same results or the same input data as NIST did in their original analysis. And what did Professor Halsey find? He found that the movement would be from the area of the fire to the right. The red indicates massive movement. He found a whole lot of other things, which I'll mention quickly, but when he compares the actual building collapse in the center to his final results on the left, we have an identical collapse that's been modeled. Whereas on the right, the US government provided computer model by NIST actually stops after 2 seconds into the global collapse. And because they don't want us to see that it's actually going to tip over. They can't even get their computer model after 7 years to look anything like the actual collapse. I don't know why. It wouldn't be that hard to model a controlled demolition. After all, that's exactly what the University of Alaska did in their final analysis. So they found that the fire did not cause the collapse of Building 7. The temperature was not high enough to cause the weakening of the steel framing. The thermal expansion did not result in a loss of support for the beams and girders. And the collapse of the building was a global failure involving what? The near simultaneous failure of all the columns in the building. Not a progressive collapse as claimed by NIST. So they actually did the report that Congress tasked NIST to do, and NIST failed miserably because of all of the errors and fraud involved. So we have another feature we need to look at, and that's feature number 9, evidence of extreme heat, given to us by who? FEMA, in their Appendix C of their May 2002 Building Performance Assessment Team report, which documented through a metallurgical examination of the steel, never before observed eutectic reactions, never before observed in building fires, causing intergranular melting, capable of turning a solid steel girder into Swiss cheese, like we see in this piece of World Trade Center 7 steel, with silver dollar-sized holes. Well, guess what? Normal office fires cannot do this to steel. So what did NIST do? They threw out this documentation when they took over the investigation from FEMA in 2002. Rapid oxidation and sulfidation. Where's the sulfur coming from? Liquid iron. Liquid iron, that's molten iron. That's 3,000 degree temperatures Fahrenheit. Office fires only get to be 500 or 600 degrees, especially these office fires. NIST claims, oh, they're over 1,000 degrees. Well, even so, they're a third of the temperatures required to do this to steel, to melt steel. And sulfur formed during this hot corrosion attack on the steel. Where does sulfur come from? They don't know. Perhaps the deepest mystery uncovered in the investigation, according to NIST. Well, sulfur is added, by the way, to thermite to become thermate, much more effective at cutting through steel. Steel members in the debris pile appear to have been partly evaporated in extraordinarily high temperatures, says the author of that report, Jonathan Barnett. But wait a minute, evaporating steel, that takes 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And we have evidence of evaporated steel from World Trade Center 7 and the Twin Towers in the pile, here documented by Abelhausen Astani Azel, who received a National Science Foundation grant to study the steel. We can tell by the color of the material pouring out of the crab claw excavators at the site of the World Trade Center what its temperature is. We're glowing yellow a bright yellow to white hot. So we're exceeding 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. There's nothing in the official narrative that can possibly explain these temperatures. In fact, thermite is the only explanation. Jet fuel, even at the World Trade Center, only burns, according to its manufacturer, ME Petroleum, about 600 degrees Fahrenheit, about 4 or 5 times less temperature than we have evidence for in the Twin Towers and at Building 7. So we got to ask ourselves, what could that be? Could it be thermite? Well, what is thermite anyway?
An incendiary used by the military, thermite is a compound of iron oxide and aluminum, which when ignited sustains an extreme heat reaction, creating molten iron. In just 2 seconds, thermite can reach temperatures over 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, quite enough to liquefy steel.
And as that steel is liquefied, it cools. And so we look for evidence of ignited incendiaries in the World Trade Center dust itself. And it's handed to us by who? The U.S. Geological Survey. In their exhaustive studies of the dust, which is mostly powdered concrete, which we'll come to, in 2006, the particle atlas of the World Trade Center dust, what did they find? Billions of molten iron microspheres. We'll come to those, but they also find melted molybdenum. Molybdenum is a material that melts at extreme hot temperatures, such as 4,700 degrees Fahrenheit. So they find all of this evidence of these molten molybdenum spheres, and they don't know where they could have come from or how the temperatures could have gotten that hot. They find evaporated lead. Lead evaporates at 3,200 degrees. It coated the asbestos and other insulation, the mineral wool insulation. So they don't know where how that could have happened. And we have the evidence of molten iron. We haven't used iron in our skyscrapers for 100 years or so. Cast iron, elemental iron, molten iron microspheres. Well, how did they get molten? They've 3,000 degrees minimum. How do they get to be iron? That's the byproduct, one of the main byproducts of thermite. How do they get to be spherical? We'll come back to that. Well, these are so ubiquitous. All the World Trade Center dust samples. They're used to distinguish World Trade Center dust from common office building dust by the EPA. Well, there's up to 6% of many of these samples are previously molten iron microspheres. Up to 4 tons altogether by extrapolation throughout the World Trade Center, well, throughout Manhattan, actually, as it spread. R.J. Lee Group finds them too and documents them. They say they're formed during the event. This is an environmental consulting firm studying the dust as well. Not before by the welders putting the building together, not afterward by the iron workers taking the building apart, but during the event. Well, how would they happen? We could do an experiment. Experiment is the arbiter of competing hypotheses. Let's do one, as Stephen Jones did, where a small amount of thermite is set off. What does it do? It looks like sparks, thousands of them, but they're molten iron microspheres. They cool and they fall in the pan. Why do they turn into spheres? Well, that's just what aerosolized liquids do under pressure because of the surface tension. That's what raindrops are. Forms iron microspheres. Could that be what's toasting the tops of these cars in and around the World Trade Center in this very high heat event? Very, very possible. Well, if that was evidence of ignited thermite, is there any evidence found of unignited thermite in the World Trade Center dust? Well, a team of 8 international scientists sought to answer that question, led by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen. They are sent independently collected samples from 7 altogether, different sources, and they find in all of them the same red-gray chips, red on one side, gray on the other, dual layered. indicating that they've been fluid applied. So they thought they were paint, right? But they're attracted by a magnet from the World Trade Center dust. So they get real curious. This has a high iron content. Well, this is interesting. What's this level of iron doing in the paint? Primer paint does have some iron in it, but it's not attracted by a magnet. So this is very interesting. They do X-ray energy dispersive spectroscopy, and they find what? Aluminum, the other ingredient of thermite, and along with iron and other materials, silicon, oxygen, carbon, manganese, which is added to thermite to become thermate, much more effective again at cutting through steel. So they go, whoa, this is not a great situation. We got to find out what's really going on here with a nuclear microscope. So they zoom in 50,000 times. What do they find? Iron oxide crystals. Again, elemental iron. Aluminum platelets, smaller than the diameter of a human hair. I mean, 1,000 times smaller, meaning nanotechnology. These are set in a matrix, a bed of oxygen, silica, carbon, organic material. Organic material is what's used to make TNT explosive, RDX. So that, because it expands by these massive gases, they're going, whoa, this is very sophisticated stuff. They did some background research from Lawrence Livermore Lab. They find this has been developed in high-tech labs. It's called super thermite, explosive composites based on thermite reactions, intimately mixed on the nanometer size scale. When you get this stuff so small, its surface volume increases exponentially. So the chemical reaction is virtually instantaneous due to the extremely fine mixing also. So in the peer-reviewed literature, they found that, gosh, at about 850 degrees Fahrenheit, this stuff in a differential scanning calorimeter, a heater, which measures the energy resultant from a reaction, finds that this is thermitic material that they've developed here. Well, the tests that from the samples that they've done show the same thing. At about 420 Celsius, 850 Fahrenheit, they ignite. Well, what do you imagine they produce when they ignite? Molten iron microspheres with the same chemical signature as the molten iron microspheres found by the USGS and R.J. Lee in all the World Trade Center dust. So we know exactly where those molten iron microspheres came from. As if we didn't know, they're found attached to partially ignited red-gray chips, as you see here and here. So you see, these materials are extremely high-tech. They're not made in a cave in Afghanistan. They're made only in the most advanced, sophisticated defense contracting laboratories. So we have the study of these ignited incendiaries in all the World Trade Center dust samples, evidenced by this team of 8 international scientists, which peer-reviewed them in this 25-page paper in the Bentham Open Chemical Physics Journal, whose conclusion was that the red layer of the red-gray chips is active, unreacted thermitic material incorporating nanotechnology and is a highly energetic pyrotechnic or explosive material, has properties of both. So altogether, these 10 key characteristic features and some very uncharacteristic features as well of controlled demolition, especially with these incendiaries, it's not evidence of destruction by fire. It's direct evidence of destruction with explosives, in this case, incendiaries in Building 7. With additional circumstantial corroborative evidence and testimony, which we've been looking at, we have proof of controlled demolition, a body of proof that has convinced more than 3,600 architects and engineers to sign on to the petition demanding a new investigation into the destruction of these towers. You can see that petition at our website, RichardGage9111. It's collectively more than 30,000 years of technical and expertise. If this many architects and engineers told you that your house was going to fall as a result of fires, would you listen to them? I'm just asking you to listen to them now, because they will appear in the forthcoming film series, 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom, which we're working on quite ferociously, and will, within a couple of weeks, provide the first episode, taking the hard evidence of the 9/11 crimes to court. I have teamed up with the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, whose litigation director, Mick Harrison, and I appear in the film. I'm providing the evidence with a couple of dozen experts that you'll be seeing.
That's great. That's great. And, Richard, if you would you back up 2 slides to the list of proofs? I would like the audience to hear them. They can't see the screen, but they will when it's on Rumble. But these are the features of controlled demolition which Richard has isolated. Sudden onset, a straight down gravitational collapse, patterned removal, free fall acceleration, total dismemberment, limited damage, sounds of explosions, pyroclastic light clouds, molten steel, iron residues, and thermite incendiaries. Those are the proofs, scientific proofs, as opposed to the fake science that we were presented by the NIST and the federal government. So thank you, Richard. We can continue.
Yeah, thank you for stopping me. I did not read those, and that's important. So this film series will be submitted to the federal, to a special grand jury for investigation of these crimes via a federal judge. We've already submitted 60 exhibits, written exhibits of this evidence, and this film will supplement each of those exhibits and more. So we have to ask ourselves if the conspiracy at Building 7 has been proven true, and we believe, along with 3,600 architects and engineers, that it has been proven. Then we have to ask ourselves, is it possible that we could have any of these features of controlled demolitions at the Twin Towers? And I submit
Richard,
to you,
once again, I would like, can you back up one photograph to the World Trade Center? I would like to take a moment to reminisce and tell the audience, I saw the World Trade Centers go up and I saw the World Trade Centers go down. I attended Power Memorial Academy here in New York from 1963 to 67, and the bus stop was right in front of the school on Amsterdam Avenue and 61st Street. So I would take the bus home, and every day for those 4 years, I saw the superstructure of the World Trade Center rising month by month, year by year. And there was a phenomenon that I've never forgotten. It has stayed with me all my life. During the later years in my high school, 67, 66, and 67, the World Trade Center had grown to about 3/4 of its size. And at the winter solstice, when the sun travels very far south, the sun was setting behind the World Trade Centers. And at that time, from at least 7 miles away, 61st and Amsterdam, it was about 1/3 of the way or almost half the way up Manhattan, I could see, with the sun behind the buildings, I could see the workmen, the iron workers, the skywalkers, constructing the building. And they looked to me like ants crawling on a structure. And I came to call them, with great appreciation and great affection, I used to call them the little ant-men of light, A-N-T, the little ant-men of light, put up those buildings before my eyes. And then in one instant, I saw them come down. And the coming down was something that I will never forget. I was awakened at about 8:45 in the morning on September 11th. My mother was on the telephone and she said, "Robert." I said, "What, Mom?" She said, "An airplane has hit the World Trade Center." I said, "What?" And I went to the television. I had a big screen, And I looked at the building with the impact and the sky, not a cloud in the sky. And I said to myself, how could a pilot ever hit the World Trade Center with not a cloud in the sky? And the rest is history. But I paused at this moment for those of you who are on Rumble can see the buildings, and it is a sunset shot. You can see the sky has that beautiful orange glow. And I could see right through those buildings, and I saw thousands of little ant-men of light who built it. And I remember them with great affection and great respect. And this is something that we owe to them. Many of them, some of them gave their lives for this. And so we have an obligation to get the truth out. So thank you, Richard Gage, for presenting it on this program today. We'll go back to you. Thank you for your indulgence.
You're so welcome, because this is what you saw on TV with these, all of us did. We were, of course, totally in shock. So that
Richard, once again, an interruption. I will never forget the sound of this. It went, and I said to myself, I screamed out, "It's going down like a zipper!" And that's exactly how it went down. I'm reliving that moment, and I hope that my emotion conveys to the audience and to you how terrible this was and how important it is for us to get to the bottom of it. So thank you. We continue.
We're showing both of the Twin Towers at the same time, though they were destroyed 15 minutes apart, so that we can see the identicality of destruction here, with upward, outward, arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, freely flying structural steel sections as sent laterally, landing 600 feet in every direction, trailing thick white smoke clouds. Well, wait a minute. These are steel sections. Why are they trailing thick white smoke clouds? Well, aluminum oxide ash is the other byproduct of thermite in addition to the molten iron. The chemical reaction yields this white ash in volumes. And this is the only explanation that can account for these thick white smoke clouds trailing of the beams and steel beams and columns that have been ejected explosively out of these towers. Let's break it down. In fact, let's use the features of controlled demolition, starting with one. Is there a sudden onset of destruction? Yes. The North Tower is standing still, and all of a sudden, it's in uniform, downward, smooth motion. No jolt, no hesitation upon impacting the cold, hard steel intact below the point of plane impacts. So there's little to no resistance, very little resistance. We'll look at that in a moment. There's no jolt or hesitation at the South Tower either. It's in stillness, and all of a sudden it's in uniform downward smooth motion. We'll break that down, but the official narrative tells us the upper story, the upper section of this building above the point of plane impacts drove the rest of the building down to the ground and then destroyed itself. This is called the crush down, crush up theory, which was developed by Zdeněk Bezant. In fact, it was developed, this extremely obfuscated mathematical wizardry. This paper that took engineers 10 years to decode, was submitted just 2 days after 9/11. The rest of us were freaked out, not knowing when the next attack was. Who's doing this to us? Where are the answers? This guy, not him, he's in his den calculating away in what became the key theoretical basis for NIST's current column failure theory. So, is there a problem with the theory? Yeah, it suffers from Newton's third law of motion. There's an equal and opposite destructive force when two bodies collide. Take a Mack truck and a Volkswagen. What happens? The Volkswagen is destroyed. Does it matter if we drop the Volkswagen onto the Mack truck? No. The top part is the lightest part, the weakest part. It can't possibly destroy the cold, hard, intact steel, which gets heavier and heavier, by the way, as we go down. These are the column thicknesses, and they get bigger too. In fact, as we get down halfway, they're 2 inches thick by 36 inches by 16 inches. They look like this. And below that, they still get heavier and heavier until at the bottom, we have almost solid steel, 52 inches by 22 inches, supporting. So how is the Volkswagen going to destroy all of this? It's a virtual pyramid. It can't happen. In fact, it doesn't. The Volkswagen destroys itself. You can see it destroying itself in the first 3 seconds. Let's make it easier for you. Watch the lower red line. There's no downward motion until maybe now. So in the first 3 seconds, the upper part is destroying itself. The question is, what's destroying it? We'll come to that. But if it were there, we would see it in NIST's pile driver, essentially, theory, where this upper section drives the rest of the building down to the ground. It's not there. None of the photos, none of the videos show that. What do they show? They show the same thing as a volcanic eruption, which happens to be on the right, if you couldn't tell the difference, with upward, outward arching streamers, a geometry of fireworks, freely flying solid objects, molten, trailed by thick white smoke clouds again. Yes, the volcanic eruption in the 2009 is on the right. We're seeing a series of explosions, massive explosions. By the way, if that upper part were there, it would have destroyed the remaining few core columns that stand about 6 seconds after the rest of the towers have been blown out around it. So this alone, this video, destroys the official narrative that says the upper part drove the rest of the building down to the ground. If that were possible, how could this spire of core columns remained standing 1,000 feet in the air? No, we're seeing explosions that are blowing out away from the core columns, which is how they're able to be left there. This is completely ignored in the NIST report, which spent $20 million of your tax dollars in creating 10,000 pages of a Potemkin village of a report, complete fraud. They were tasked by Congress to determine how and why World Trade Center 1, 2, and 7 collapsed. They failed miserably, especially when you look at the evidence, which they completely ignored, of feature number 2 of controlled demolition, patterned explosions, and flashes of light, documented in 12,000 pages of testimony, read by Professor Graham McQueen, who since he first did this in 2011 has now come up with 180 separate references to explosions by the first responders who were recorded within 1 month after their experiences on 9/11. We felt the ground shake, one of them says. You could see the tower sway, and then it just came down. Now, again and again, you're going to hear the specific order of events. There's something they're seeing, something they're feeling, something they're watching before the tower ever comes down. This is critically important, and it's completely ignored, all of it, by NIST. All of a sudden, the ground just started shaking. Felt like a train running under my feet. The next thing we know, we look up and the tower is collapsing. It shook my bones. Shortly before the first tower came down, I remember feeling the ground shaking, heard a terrible noise, and then debris just started flying everywhere. I saw flash, flash, flash at the lower level of the building, you know, like when they demolished a building. With each popping sound, initially an orange, and then a red flash came out of the building, and then it would just go all around the building on both sides. Saw a number of brief light sources being emitted from inside the building between floors 10 and 15. He saw about 6 of these brief flashes be accompanied by a crackling sound before the tower collapsed. I saw low-level flashes. I saw flash, 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 and then it looked like the building came down. You ever see professional demolition when they set charges on certain floors and then you hear a pop, pop, pop? When I heard that friggin' noise, that's when I saw the building coming down. An explosion appeared at the very top. Simultaneously, from all four sides, materials shot out horizontally, and then there seemed to be a momentary delay before you could see the beginning of the collapse. There was an explosion in the South Tower, one floor under another. When it hit about the 5th floor, I figured it was a bomb because it looked like a synchronized, deliberate kind of thing. It seemed like on television when they blow up these buildings, it seemed like it was going all the way around like a belt, all these explosions. The building was blowing out on all four sides. We actually heard the pops, you know? You heard the pops of the building. I thought the terrorists planted explosives somewhere in the building. That's how loud it was, a crackling explosive. Another loud boom at the upper floors, and a series of smaller explosions which appeared to go completely around the building at the upper floors. And another loud, earth-shattering blast with a large fireball which blew out more debris. The lower level of the building, you know, like when they demolish a building, that's what I thought I saw. Do you see any flashes? I said, yes. Well, I thought it was just me. He said, no, I saw them too. Everybody, I think, at this point still thought these buildings were blown up. So I was fully expecting anything else to blow up. You were there when the planes hit? No, I was there when the building exploded. You mean when it fell down? No, when it exploded. What does this resemble? A controlled demolition so far? We keep going with feature number 3. Is there a straight down symmetrical progression outside the footprint in the case of these explosions? Watch the South Tower. It actually begins to tip over at first. It's tipping over at 22 degrees. So we have asymmetrical loading on the structure below from this building, part of the building that's falling off. We have asymmetrical damage from the planes up above, asymmetrical damage from the fires. How in the world do we then get complete symmetrical progression of this building's destruction all the way down the face of the building? Well, we can zoom in on the leading corner of these waves of destruction. And what do we see? In this looped video, I see at least a dozen independent explosions going off floor by floor. This is not a nuclear weapon going off. These are independently placed and can only be that of shaped cutter charges destroying the columns floor by floor. Nor is it in directed energy weapons that have somehow taken down this building. These are obviously explosions indicated by the isolated explosive ejections called squibs in the controlled demolition industry, which occur, here we go, which occur 20 stories down below the zone destruction, 40 stories down below the zone of destruction. They even occur as low as 60 stories down below the zone of destruction. There's no explanation whatsoever here, once again, in the official narrative, nor are these explained by NIST in any credible sense. Well, let's look at the upper level above the point of plane impacts in the South Tower. On the left side in this looped video, what do we see? Dozens of isolated explosive ejections, ripping apart, apparently, the steel structural frame of this upper section. So it can't possibly act as a rigid body and react off the rigid body below and thus fall off the structure below. It then can only settle back into as acting as a liquid or a bag of sand, if you will, as an analogy, to settle back down into the structure. Well, okay. How fast is the building coming down? Feature number 5. Is it coming down at or near free fall acceleration? David Chandler once again documents the top of the building, and it's coming down at 64% of free fall, 2/3 of free fall. It's still in acceleration. It's still getting faster and faster each second. In fact, it's getting faster and faster through what? A massive steel exterior with little ant-men of light crawling all over it. This structure has more steel than glass on the perimeter. This is a very experimental structure structurally for its time in history. They were very conservative in how they put this building together. It's a Verandil truss with perpendicular members that are welded and bolted together. So we have, through this structure and the core columns inside, 47 massive core columns, that destruction is accelerating through. Didn't even slow it down. Not one bit. It's getting faster and faster. And what's happening to those beams and columns? They're being laterally ejected in feature number 7, a very unusual feature of controlled demolition in this case, impaling themselves on skyscrapers all around the World Trade Center Twin Towers, destroying the winter gardens of the World Financial Center 600 feet away, with freely flying structural steel sections weighing 4 and 8 tons laterally ejected at 80 miles an hour, clocked by physicists that fast, including this one that's about to hit the World Trade Center 7. Back to, forward to, back to, wait a minute. It's going out. It's not going down. How does gravity work? Down. What's happening here? Complete lateral expulsion of these steel members, trailed by what? Thick white smoke clouds. Again, can only be of the aluminum oxide ash associated with the thermite incendiary reaction. There's enough energy here to hurl a 200-pound cannonball 3 miles. And there's a lot of these cannonballs, hundreds and hundreds of them, issued in a 12 to 1,400 foot diameter around each of the towers, equidistant, again, well beyond the boundaries of the World Trade Center, impacting Building 7 to the north and the Financial Center 600 feet to the west. By the way, if 100,000 tons of structural steel framing has been ejected outside the footprint, almost all of it, because you don't see a 20-story pile of steel in the middle or a 50-story pile of steel. What's crushing the building? This has to be a third of the weight of the building, at least. Maybe it's the concrete. Let's look at the concrete, because what happened to it? There's 110 floors, each an acre in size, 4 and 8 inches thick throughout this building, poured on metal decking held by lightweight steel trusses spanning up to 60 feet. What happened to those pancakes that we'd be expecting to find 110 of them? Well, we don't find 50 of them. We don't find 10 of them. We don't find one of these acre-sized floors at the bottom. We see a 4 or 6-story pile of miscellaneous steel, an extremely small percentage of that steel. In a real gravitational collapse, we see pancakes on the right from the earthquake, in this case in Mexico. But we're missing 100,000 tons of concrete. Where did it go? There it is. All the photos, all the videos show the pulverization of this concrete in midair. And we're talking 90,000 tons of concrete pulverized to 100 micron particles on average, according to the analysis of the dust, and spread throughout lower Manhattan in a 3 square mile area, 3 inches or so thick, covering the streets. That's where the 90,000 tons of concrete landed. And if that's true, what's crushing the building? It wasn't the steel, and it's sure not the concrete.
Richard, I would like to share a memory that I have of about 10 to 12 years ago when YouTube really got going. I came across a video taken by someone who was quite close to the collapse of the South Tower. And as the South Tower collapsed, he caught it right from the very top. One section of it blew up in a chunk. I would say 15 stories of this building. The top section slipped off sideways. And as it was falling, I could see every floor exploding in the controlled detonation. Even in midair and mid-flight, the top had slipped off and was falling sideways, and this photographer, videographer caught it. But as it was falling, the explosions were detonating, and that's why the whole chunk never reached the ground. Imagine 15 floors, 15 levels of the center falling sideways as a cube, basically, but it was pulverized before it hit the ground because every floor detonated as I watched it. And then when I searched for that video, it had been scrubbed within days. And so much information, so much data and video proofs have been deleted from YouTube and other sources. And it's this sanitizing. The US government sanitizes these crimes for its own advantage. Back to you. I thought that it's important to give that testimony, an eyewitness testimony. I witnessed a video taken by a man that showed a cube of 15 stories falling sideways, and I thought if that ever hit the ground, it never hit the ground because in midair, the floors were detonating. Bang, 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 bang.
Yeah, it just disintegrates.
Exactly.
You see the results of that, but I haven't seen the detonations yet. During the daylight, they're not as bright as they are with RDX or C4. So thermite's a different animal. It doesn't sound as, it doesn't make as big of a bang, though the witnesses heard it, as you've seen. Well, so this is important also because the weight of the steel and the concrete was all used by Zdeněk Bezant in his obfuscating paper published 2 days after 9/11. But what did he do? He doubled the mass up above. In addition to using all of that mass, which wasn't even there to use because it's, as we saw, it's been disintegrated and disseminated outside the footprint of the Trade Center complex, but he also decreased the column strength below by factor of 3 when you add up all of this together. The energy absorption capacity below by a factor of 3. So,
Richard, this man has an unusual name. Where is he from?
Oh, I think he's Czechoslovakian or something.
Just wondering where his allegiance lies.
Yeah.
And the emphasis on lies.
Yeah, all these guys have we have some major questions for all of them.
Right.
So now it's rigged in favor of a collapse. It's complete fraud. And NIST uses it today as its key theoretical basis for its column failure theory. So it has to be uncovered. And there's a process in the engineering world that's being followed by Tony Zamboti, Richard Johns, and others to submit, and they've submitted many papers, but in the American Society of Civil Engineers Journal of Engineering Mechanics, they won't publish this submitted paper, which challenges the results of Zdeněk Bezant. Why? They say it's out of scope. Well, how can it be out of scope to publish a paper that's refuting a previously published paper in that journal? So obviously they're censoring the truth here. And so we have to ask ourselves, okay, how deep does this go? Well, what about access to the towers? Well, it turns out that there's a fireproofing upgrade in the year prior to 9/11, which was impacting, retrofitting the exact area that both planes hit the respective towers. So could this have been a thermite liquid applied product under the guise of a fireproofing upgrade? There are indeed liquid applied fireproofing. They call it intumescent paints. It's a possibility. This is researched by the 9/11 researcher Kevin Ryan in at digwithin.net. I encourage everybody to look at that blog. There's a lot of material there, as well as the Journal of 9/11 Studies, in which other excellent papers, including Kevin Ryan, have been published in. How could they have accessed the towers in the first place? Could explosives have been placed without the building occupants knowing? Well, the core of the building houses not only the elevators, but the core columns. So those elevators are immediately adjacent to all the core columns. They would have to simply saw through 2 inches thick gypsum board that surrounds each of the elevator hoistways. And what would we have to have? An elevator modernization to provide cover for such an operation. Why would the Port Authority have given one of the largest, most sophisticated elevator modernization programs in history to a small maintenance contractor with basically one customer, which is the World Trade Center? So Ace Elevator came out of nowhere to obtain this contract, obscuring or Otis Elevator was pushed out. They'd installed these elevators and maintained them up to the time of this modernization. Could they have been doing something else in there? Well, it turns out on the day of 9/11, there was a labor dispute, and the members of that company, Ace Elevator, 50 of them, were pulled out to a union meeting to discuss some business. So they weren't there to help the firefighters rescue the victims in the elevator cabs, for which they are experts in. So we certainly want an investigation of Ace Elevator too, as well as the disposition of 180,000 tons altogether of steel, and easily the largest and most perplexing structural failures in history. We have 400 truckloads a day lined up starting just 2 weeks after 9/11 to take this steel to these barges, which were sent to China for recycling before investigators could get their hands on it and do a proper forensic investigation. This is the illegal destruction of evidence in a crime scene, prompting Bill Manning, editor-in-chief of Fire Engineering magazine, to cry out crucial evidence that could answer many questions is on the slow boat to China, showing an astounding ignorance of government officials to the value of a thorough scientific investigation. The destruction and removal of evidence must stop immediately. But it didn't, of course. And so we have the illegal destruction of evidence in a massive crime scene, the crime of the century, which evidence has convinced not just 3,600 architects and engineers demanding a new investigation, but millions of citizens all around the world joined together in the 9/11 Truth Movement, which are supporting us in getting out this 15-episode series of 9/11 Crime Scene to Courtroom. And many of those experts appear in this film, as a matter of fact, and in our film 9/11 Explosive Evidence, with 40 high-rise architects, structural engineers, metallurgists, chemists, physicists, controlled demolition experts, all laying out the evidence. The documentary of about Leroy Halsey's pursuit of the finite element analysis from the University of Alaska in Fairbanks to find out what really happened to this building, which we just briefly touched on today. And the documentary, 15 minutes long is all, narrated by actor Ed Asner, which I made 10 years ago, which is all available on our website. You can watch it for free or buy the DVD, 9/11 RichardGage9111.org, as well as download the brochure and print it for free, or purchase them, 100 copies, and hand them out to everybody, because we got to get to the bottom of this. We've lost $6.4 trillion in the global war on terror, and at least 1 million lives, most in Afghanistan and Iraq. We have 14 trillion spent on the longest war in U.S. history in Afghanistan, and the loss of our civil liberties following 9/11, with a global war on terror, including a torture policy, homeland security, the emerging police state, Middle East injustices, the draining of our treasury, the illegal spying on citizens through the Patriot Act, the Military Commissions Act, the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012. Any of us can be arrested without a right to a lawyer, a trial, a juror, a jury. We can even be tortured and assassinated, all by merely being accused of terrorism, which is simply defined as the use of force. And that definition is slipping into the loss of free speech altogether, of course, as many of you already know. So the truth about 9/11 is a dark one. We cannot afford to wait any longer. I mean, where do we draw our line in the sand? Do we wait for the next 9/11? Well, I have news for you. It's happened over the last 3 years with the engineered disease and the prescribed solution engineered well before or during the engineering of that disease over the last 3 years. It's happened again in Gaza also. So we have presentations on each of those subjects and the parallels between them and 9/11. So we're not going to stop speaking the truth about 9/11 because we're given many occurrences of modern day false flag operations to compare it to, as I just mentioned. In fact, we're not small. We may feel small. We may feel like a 2 millimeter high domino, but look what happens when we can work together.
Boom. That was 13 dominoes. If I had 29 dominoes, the last domino would be as tall as the Empire State Building.
And that's where we're heading. Working together, billions of us, we can combine our resources, find out who we really are, and take on the heart as well as the tentacles of the deep state that has taken over and hijacked our country. So just tell 2 people, share 2 people with this podcast with 2 people and ask them to share it with 2 people. That's how we get our domino structure to scale so that we can effectively accommodate the end of this evil that has established itself in our world leadership. Agreed?
Oh, wholeheartedly agreed. Folks, you've been listening to 9/11 Explosive Evidence. It's not too late yet. From Richard Gage, whose website is RichardGage9111.org. Richard, we should talk about the 9/11 Commission and who constituted that. One person that I particularly dislike is a fellow named Philip Selikoff, who ignored all of this evidence.
He was assigned by the Bush administration to be the lead staff for the 9/11 Commission. What does that mean? He took it upon himself actually to outline the 9/11 Commission report before the commissioners ever met. And he handed them the questions to ask, and it was designed from the beginning as a massive cover-up. In fact, guess what his PhD was his study was in? The creation and maintenance of public myth. You cannot make this stuff up.
Remarkable. How well qualified. It reminds me of the Warren Commission report where the Nicholas Katzenbach was appointed Attorney General, and he said the trick is to convince the public that this was done by one man. And so the conclusion was formed before any of the evidence was gathered. So this is a standard operating procedure that we see repeated over and over and over again. Rejoice in your life. Rejoice in this summer. For me, it's a summer of hope. And I pray that we will achieve truth in our time. And it's through people like Richard Gage and many others, Barbara Honecker among them, who took up the challenge and have been consistent and persistent in bringing the truth to the American public. We have a few minutes left. I'd like to turn them to Richard. There were aircraft that hit the World Trade Centers, but they were not enough to bring them down. So there was a group of Muslim patsies that were set up, mind-controlled idiots, who were enticed into this operation. And they are the fall guys. But the real villains are still operating behind the scenes. And that's who we have to expose and get rid of, and not let them lead us into another series of costly, pointless wars. The whole purpose of the World Trade Center attacks and the Pentagon attack was to villainize global Islam and Muslims as the fall guys for another group that doesn't give a damn about the United States of America, doesn't give a damn about Americans. We are only tools to be used for their ends. And we will continue to expose that gray presence. Éminence grise, the French say, the gray presence, the man behind the curtain who's pulling the strings. And Philip Zelikoff was one of those.
He sure was. And Professor Graham McQueen, the late great professor, he told us how this works in a film called 9/11 Peace and War. And he calls it the war trigger system. False flags are used historically, dozens and dozens of examples, used historically to bring about war so that those who control the world can control it better or seek to reinforce their control.
Thank you, Richard Gage. Come back again, because I know we're not finished with this.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.